Local leaders are reacting to the ruling tonight, and that includes Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield, who has led multiple lawsuits against the Trump administration. Fox 12's Abby Davis joins us now in studio with what he's saying and how the court's decision will impact Oregonians. Abby?
Yeah, well, the AG called the decision a big win. He spearheaded this legal battle, which started last April with roughly a dozen other states. During a virtual news conference, Rayfield said President Trump and other politicians should be doing everything in their power to lower costs for Americans, not the opposite. He told reporters the president's sweeping tariffs have hit Oregonians in every corner of the state. He says we, the American people, bore the brunt of the tariffs, not the foreign countries like the Trump administration promised.
From the food that we buy, to the clothes that we wear, to the lights that we turn on our homes, everyone has been impacted. Today's ruling is a symbol. It is an affirmative ruling that the Constitution, the rule of law in this country still matters. The president may be an incredibly powerful person, but he does not get to unilaterally sit in his office and raise taxes hidden as tariffs on all Americans.
Rayfield says hopefully Oregonians should start to see prices drop on various items soon. He says some local businesses should see immediate relief, especially those in the food industry that rely on ingredients from other countries. It's still unclear if and when the Trump administration will issue refunds for what was paid under the unconstitutional tariffs. That issue will likely play out in court. The AG also responded to the president's pledge to impose a new global 10% tariff, like Pete mentioned. He says he'll be watching very carefully, and if President Trump, quotes, steps out of his lane, the Oregon DOJ will fight back. Reporting in studio, Abby Davis, Fox 12 Oregon.